Evening, sweetheart. It's Maggie. Come sit with me. Let's make this night a gentler one. Tonight feels quieter than usual. Not the peaceful kind of quiet that wraps itself around you like a blanket, but the kind that settles just a little farther away, as if the evening itself is standing politely at the doorway, waiting to see whether it's needed. I turned on the lamp a few minutes ago. A light spread the way it always does, slow, patient, familiar, but something about it felt different tonight. Not dimmer, not colder, just less noticed. I sat down in my chair, the one that knows the shape of me better than any mirror ever could. That sound still makes me smile. It's the chair's way of saying, I see you. Funny how furniture does that better than people sometimes. Lily followed me in and curled herself neatly at my feet. She didn't look up, didn't need to. She already knew where I was. It was earlier this evening, actually, before I came home, when the feeling first brushed past me. Not sharply, just enough to notice. I had stopped by the market on my way back. Nothing special, just milk, tea, the kind of bread that behaves itself if you toast it gently. The cashier smiled, a polite one, and spoke over my shoulder while scanning my items, already halfway into the next conversation waiting behind me. No rudeness, no cruelty, just efficiency. I stood there with my wallet in my hand and realized, for a brief, unexpected second, that I could have been anyone, or no one at all. It surprised me how quickly the thought arrived, and how quietly it stayed. By the time I stepped back outside, the moment had already tucked itself away, but it left behind a small chill that had nothing to do with the weather. You see, I'm not someone who needs attention. I've lived enough years to know the noise fades eventually. But being noticed, being seen, that's different. At home now, I pour myself a cup of tea, chamomile again. The steam rises slowly, catching the lamplight just long enough to be beautiful, and then it disappears. I watch it longer than I mean to. There's something about steam that understands invisibility. It's warm, it's present, and if you blink, it's gone. I take a sip. The tea tastes exactly right. Not too strong, not too faint, but I still find myself holding the cup closer than usual, as if the warmth needs a witness. I don't think tonight is about sadness. Not really. It's about that subtle moment many of us reach, often without warning, when the world doesn't quite trip over itself to acknowledge our presence anymore. Not because we've done anything wrong, not because we've faded, but because we've grown quieter. And quiet things, well, they're easy to overlook. The lamp hums softly beside me. Lily breathes slow and steady. The house holds its shape. Everything here knows I'm present. But still, there it is, that faint feeling, like standing near a window and realizing your reflection has blended into the dark. Not gone, just harder to see. So tonight, sweetheart, I want to sit with that feeling, not push it away, not dress it up, just notice it, the way we notice steam in lamplight before it fades. We'll take this evening slowly. There's time, and I'm right here with you. There was a time when people asked me things, small things, important things, unimportant things that somehow felt important because someone bothered to ask. What do you think, Maggie? Have you done this before? Does this seem right to you? Questions like that used to arrive naturally, the way morning light does. No ceremony, just presence. Tonight, as I sit here with my tea warming my palms, I realize how quietly those questions slipped away. Not all at once, not dramatically. They just stopped showing up. I didn't notice when it first happened. Most things disappear that way, politely. I stir my tea, slow and careful. The sound circles back to me, soft and steady. It reminds me of how conversations used to move back and forth with room to land. Somewhere along the way, the world decided I had already answered enough, that I had already spoken my share. That experience, once offered, no longer needed requesting. There's a strange loneliness in that, not the loud kind, the quiet one, the kind that doesn't ache, it just settles. Earlier today, I caught myself starting a sentence and then stopping halfway through, not because I forgot what I wanted to say, but because I realized no one was waiting for the end of it. It startled me, not sharply, just enough to make me pause. I take a sip of my tea. It's still warm, but not quite the way it was before. Tea cools faster when you're not paying attention. So do voices. I don't think this is about being ignored. It's more subtle than that. It's about becoming assumed, as if my thoughts are already accounted for before I've even opened my mouth. At a certain age, people stop asking what you think and start telling you what they've decided. They mean well. They usually do. But there's something tender about being asked, about being invited into a moment instead of folded neatly around its edges. Lily lifts her head and shifts closer. Her presence presses gently against my ankle. She doesn't ask me questions. She doesn't need answers. She just needs to know I'm here. And I am. I really am. The lamp hums quietly, steady in its attention. It doesn't assume. It doesn't rush ahead. It waits for me to sit where I always do before it fills the room. I think about how often we equate being needed with being valued, and how easy it is to forget that wisdom doesn't expire just because fewer people ask for it out loud. Still, when the questions stop coming, a part of you wonders whether your voice has softened too much to be heard. I hold my cup a little closer now, not because I'm cold, because warmth, even quiet warmth, feels better when it's acknowledged. Tonight isn't asking me questions either. It's just sitting with me, and somehow that feels like the beginning of an answer. There's a moment, not dramatic, not loud, when the thought slips in. What if I'm slowly becoming invisible? It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't demand attention. It just settles quietly beside you, like a coat you didn't realize you were wearing. I noticed it tonight, all standing in line at the pharmacy. A young couple behind me laughed, their voices bright, overlapping, full of plans that hadn't yet learned the spoke to them with easy familiarity. When it was my turn, the smile softened, shorter, politer, already moving on. Again, nothing unkind, but something different. I walked out holding my small paper bag and felt that old, quiet question rise. Not, am I useful? Not, do I matter? But, do they still see me? It's a strange fear, because it isn't born of vanity. It's born of history, of having once been needed and now being completed. We spend so much of our lives being essential to children, to partners, to work, to households that would tilt sideways if we stepped away for a moment. And then one day, without ceremony, life rearranges itself. The calls become less urgent, the questions less frequent, the roles fulfilled. No one tells you this part. They talk about freedom, about rest, about finally having time for yourself. They don't talk about the quiet fear that sneaks in with all that space. The fear that without constant need, you might slowly fade into the background. I sat down in my chair earlier tonight and felt its familiar creak. That sound grounded me. The chair knows my weight. It remembers me. Lily pressed her back against my foot, solid and warm. She doesn't measure relevance. She measures presence. And I realized something then. The fear of being invisible isn't about not being looked at. It's about not being held in someone's awareness, not being factored into the world's rhythm anymore. It's a fear many women carry quietly, especially those of us who have given so much of ourselves away that we forget what it feels like to simply exist without performing usefulness. I don't think invisibility happens all at once. I think it arrives in moments like these, in softened smiles, in conversations that move around you, in being thanked instead of consulted. And if you're not careful, you start shrinking to match that treatment. But tonight I notice the fear. I don't wrestle it. I don't scold it. I let it sit beside me. Because fears, like people, soften when they are acknowledged. And if you're feeling that quiet fear too, sweetheart, you're not disappearing. You're just standing in a different kind of light. one that requires a slower gaze. And I'm looking right here. After that thought settled, the one about being invisible, I didn't try to push it away. I stayed with it. I washed my hands at the sink and watched the water move over my skin. The hands looking back at me were not the hands I had when I was young. They're slower now, veined, familiar, but they are hands that have held lives together. That knowledge doesn't vanish just because the hands have changed. I dried them carefully, the way you do when you're no longer in a hurry. That too is a kind of presence. Back in the living room, I sat down again. The sound felt reassuring this time. Not as proof that I exist, but as confirmation that I belong here. I looked around the room, the lamp, the photographs, the small table with its uneven leg that I never quite got around to fixing. Everything in this room has learned how I move. That's not invisibility. That's intimacy. We often mistake quiet familiarity for being overlooked. But the truth is, only things that matter deeply are allowed to fade into the background like that. Lily shifted again, pressed her nose against my ankle, then settled. She checks in like that sometimes, not to ask, just to confirm. I think about all the ways I'm still here that don't require announcement. The way I notice when a room feels tense. The way I know when silence is kinder than advice. The way I can sense a story forming before it's told. These aren't loud skills. They don't draw attention, but they shape moments. Earlier, when no one asked my opinion, I felt invisible. Now, sitting here, I realize something else. Some of my presence has moved from the front of the room to the structure holding it together. Beams aren't seen, but without them, everything collapses. That thought doesn't erase the sting, but it softens it. It gives it context. There's dignity in being woven into the fabric of things instead of displayed at the surface. I lift my cup again. The tea is nearly gone now. The last sip is always the quietest. I don't need to prove that I'm here tonight. The room already knows. My body knows. My breath knows. And perhaps that's enough for this moment. Being seen doesn't always look like attention. Sometimes it looks like belonging. And I belong right here. It occurred to me tonight, somewhere between the last sip of tea and the lamp's steady glow, that I've spent years noticing everyone else who needed rest, who needed space, who needed to be heard, and who needed to be left alone. That skill didn't disappear when the world stopped asking for it. It simply turned inward. I noticed the way my shoulders lowered once I stopped waiting for recognition. I noticed the quiet relief in not having to perform relevance anymore. I leaned back. The chair held me without comment. It didn't need me to be useful, only present. There's a strange freedom in that, in realizing you don't need to be witnessed in order to exist fully. Lily stretched and resettled, her breathing slow and even. She's never once asked me what I contribute. She just knows when I'm near. And tonight, I choose to notice myself the way she does, without evaluation, without comparison. I notice the rhythm of my breath. It hasn't rushed in years. It has learned patience. I notice the quiet pride in having survived things that were never spoken of again. I notice the softness that comes from having stopped proving. I notice how the fear of invisibility loosens its grip when I stop chasing reflection. There's a deep kindness in becoming your own witness, in saying, I see you. I know what you've carried. No audience required. I think we're taught, especially as women, that being seen means being chosen. But there's another kind of seeing, the kind that doesn't depend on being selected. It depends on staying, on remaining present, even when the room isn't watching. Tonight, I don't feel invisible. I feel unobserved. And there's a peace in that I didn't expect. Perhaps the night isn't asking me to step forward. Perhaps it's inviting me to settle more deeply into myself. And that feels enough. The room hasn't changed. The lamp is still glowing with the same quiet certainty. The tea has cooled, but something in me has warmed. I used to think being invisible meant disappearing, that if no one noticed, I was somehow fading. But tonight, I understand it differently. Invisibility isn't absence. It's simply the absence of demand. No one asking me to explain myself. No one waiting for a version of me that fits their memory. I sit here, not shrinking, not dimming, just resting. The chair holds, the floor holds, the night holds. Lily shifts again, pressing her back a little closer to my foot. She knows I'm here. That seems to be enough for her. And maybe it can be enough for me too. There's a certain dignity in being unremarkable to the world, but deeply familiar to yourself. At this age, I don't need to be introduced. I don't need to be announced. I've already arrived. The night stretches, not outward, but inward, inviting me to settle a little deeper into quiet. I let my hands rest in my lap, still, unjudged, and I realize something small and very kind. Even if the world forgets to look, I don't have to forget myself. I'm still here, breathing, present, enough. So rest well tonight, sweetheart. If you've ever felt unseen, let this be your reminder. You are not missing. You are simply resting outside the spotlight. Good night from me, Maggie.